Ignored at her sister's wedding, she hid her tears until the Duke said, "Not tonight, my dear." The Blackwood ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles, their light dancing across crystal glasses and gilded frames, yet somehow failing to reach the shadowed alcove where Marianne Vale stood. Her gloved fingers clutched a delicate fan, unopened, unused, as she observed her sister's wedding celebration unfold before her like an elaborate theatrical production in which she had been denied even the smallest role. "Such a radiant bride," whispered an elderly dowager to her companion, "and the elder Miss Vale, well, one cannot help but wonder why she remains unwed at 26. Perhaps because she lacks both fortune and vivacity," came the reply, deliberately pitched to Carrie, "though I suppose someone might eventually settle for her quiet temperament." Marianne pressed her lips together, the slight tremble betraying the emotion she fought desperately to contain. The musicians played a sprightly quadrille, and the wedding guests whirled about in patterns as precise as the social hierarchy that had placed Seraphine Vale, now Lady Blackwood, at its pinnacle and relegated Marianne to its shadows. Seraphine's laughter rang out above the music as Lord Blackwood twirled his new bride beneath a canopy of white roses and silver ribbons. Her golden curls caught the light, her diamond tiara sending prisms dancing across the marble floor. She was resplendent in ivory silk and Brussels lace, every inch the triumphant beauty their mother had meticulously crafted her to be. "Oh, Marianne, do fetch my handkerchief," Lady Vale commanded from nearby, not bothering to turn her head fully toward her elder daughter. "Seraphine may require it after the next dance." "Yes, mother." Marianne's voice was soft, nearly lost beneath the swell of the orchestra. As she moved toward the anteroom where the ladies had left their reticules, a sudden hush fell over one corner of the ballroom. Like a ripple in still water, the silence spread until even the musicians faltered, their notes trailing into uncertainty. The Duke of Thornfield had arrived. Tall and imposing in his perfectly tailored evening attire, he stood in the grand doorway, his presence commanding the attention that wealth and title invariably secured. His dark hair was swept back from a face that poets might describe as severe rather than handsome, all clean lines and sharp angles, softened only by the surprising gentleness of his gaze. That gaze now swept the room with cool detachment until, inexplicably, it settled upon Marianne. She froze, her heart stuttering beneath her ribs. For one breathless moment, she felt truly seen, not as Seraphine's plain sister or Lady Vale's disappointing firstborn, but simply as herself. The Duke inclined his head slightly, the barest acknowledgement, before turning to receive Lord Blackwood's effusive greeting. Marianne continued her errand, retrieving her mother's handkerchief with fingers that trembled more pronouncedly now. When she returned to the ballroom, she found Seraphine surrounded by admirers, while Lady Vale looked on with undisguised pride. "Your handkerchief, mother," Marianne murmured, extending the delicate scrap of lace. Lady Vale accepted it without looking away from Seraphine. "Do stand up straighter, Marianne. Your posture does nothing to recommend you." A fresh wave of shame washed over her. Marianne lifted her chin and squared her shoulders, though she knew no amount of proper posture would transform her into the daughter her mother wanted. "Lady Vale," a deep voice intoned from behind them, "may I have the honor of an introduction to your elder daughter?" The Duke of Thornfield stood before them, his expression unreadable. Lady Vale's surprise manifested in a rapid fluttering of her fan. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure. Of course, this is my daughter, Miss Marianne Vale." "Miss Vale," he bowed with formal precision, "I believe I have had the pleasure of admiring your watercolors at Lady Harrington's exhibition last season." Marianne felt the color rise in her cheeks. "You are mistaken, Your Grace. I have never exhibited my paintings." "Then the world has been denied a singular talent," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "For I am certain I recognized your hand in those delicate landscape studies." Lady Vale's fan fluttered more rapidly. "Marianne dabbles, nothing more. Now, Your Grace, you simply must congratulate Seraphine. Such a love match. Lord Blackwood is besotted." "In due time, madam." The Duke's attention remained fixed on Marianne. "Miss Vale, would you honor me with the next dance?" A collective gasp seemed to ripple through their immediate vicinity. Marianne felt the weight of dozens of curious eyes, heard the whispers already beginning to circulate. She began, only to be interrupted by her mother. "Marianne does not dance, Your Grace. A persistent ankle weakness, you understand. But Seraphine would be delighted." "I did not address Lady Blackwood," the Duke said quietly, but with such authority that Lady Vale fell silent. "Miss Vale, do you dance?" A tear threatened at the corner of her eye. Marianne blinked it away quickly, raising her gaze to meet his. When asked, Your Grace, the musicians struck up a waltz, and the Duke extended his hand. Then shall we? For one eternal moment Marianne hesitated on the precipice of decision. Then, with a courage she had not known she possessed, she placed her gloved hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the floor. The waltz was still new enough to retain its hint of scandal, especially when performed by an unmarried lady of questionable standing and a duke of unquestionable influence. As Thornfield guided Marianne into the first turn, the ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Near the refreshment table, Lady Vale's face had gone as white as her daughter's bridal gown, while Seraphine's expression darkened like a summer sky before a storm. "You have caused quite a stir, Your Grace," Marianne ventured, her voice barely audible above the music. "A favourite occupation of mine, I confess." His hand at her waist was proper, yet she felt the steady pressure of it like a brand through the layers of her gown. Though rarely with such worthy purpose, they moved together with surprising ease. For all her supposed ankle weakness, Marianne followed his lead with natural grace, her steps light and assured. "May I inquire as to the nature of this purpose?" she asked, her eyes fixed carefully on his shoulder rather than his face. "The righting of an imbalance," he replied. "This evening has seen far too many tears concealed behind fans and far too much true merit overlooked in favor of superficial shine." Marianne's steps faltered. "I have shed no tears, sir." His smile was brief but genuine. "You have not. And that restraint speaks to a strength of character that I find infinitely more compelling than the vapid gaiety that passes for feminine accomplishment in these circles." The dance brought them near to where Seraphine stood with her new husband, her beautiful features arranged in an expression of calculated indifference that failed to mask her displeasure. "My sister is not vapid," Marianne said quietly. "She is simply what our world has shaped her to be, as are we all to some degree." The Duke guided her through a complicated turn with effortless skill, yet some maintain their true essence despite society's best efforts to sand away all interesting edges. The musicians brought the waltz to its conclusion, and Thornfield led Marianne to the edge of the dance floor with the same focused attention he had shown throughout their dance. Rather than returning her immediately to her mother, however, he directed their steps toward the terrace doors. "Would you care for some air, Miss Vale? The night is uncommonly mild." Before she could respond, Lady Vale materialized before them, her composure restored and her determination evident in the set of her jaw. "Marianne, Lord and Lady Blackwood require your presence for the cutting of the cake." She turned to the Duke with a practiced smile. "Your Grace, you must allow me to introduce you to the Countess of Westmoreland. She has been most eager to make your acquaintance." "Another time, perhaps," he replied with a slight bow. "Miss Vale and I were just stepping out for a moment of respite from the crowd." Lady Vale's smile tightened. "I fear that would be most improper, Your Grace. Marianne's reputation, you understand, is of the utmost concern to me," he finished smoothly. "Which is why we shall remain in full view of the ballroom, with the doors open to the night air." Without waiting for further objection, he offered Marianne his arm and led her onto the stone terrace. The night air was indeed mild, scented with roses from the garden below. Stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black silk, far more beautiful than any tiara. "Your mother is most protective," Thornfield observed, his tone dry. "Of appearances, yes." Marianne gazed out over the darkened garden. "Though I suspect her current concern has more to do with Seraphine's displeasure than my reputation." "Ah, yes. One must not outshine the bride on her wedding day." He leaned against the stone balustrade, studying her profile in the spill of light from the ballroom. "Though in your case I fear the crime is not outshining, but simply shining at all." Marianne turned to him, puzzlement clear in her expression. "Your Grace, I must confess I do not understand your interest. We have never been formally introduced before tonight. I am neither beautiful like my sister, nor accomplished in any notable way. Why single me out for such attention?" He considered her for a long moment before answering. "Because when I entered that ballroom amid all the silk and diamonds and carefully rehearsed laughter, you alone appeared real, a living, breathing woman, rather than a porcelain figurine arranged for display." "You find authenticity in my plainness?" she asked, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her tone. "I find beauty in your truth," he corrected gently. "The quiet dignity with which you bear your mother's casual cruelty, the genuine smile you offered your sister, despite her transparent jealousy of even the smallest attention paid to you, the tear you refused to shed when it would have given others satisfaction to witness your pain." That unshed tear threatened again, and this time Marianne could not blink it away before it escaped, tracing a silent path down her cheek. She turned quickly back toward the garden, mortified by her weakness. "Forgive me," she whispered. "You speak too kindly, and I find myself unequal to it." Inside the ballroom, the orchestra began a lively country dance. Laughter and the rhythmic sound of feet against the floor spilled out onto the terrace. The celebration continued unabated, oblivious to the small drama unfolding in its margins. "Miss Vale," the Duke said, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear him. "Marianne, look at me, please." Slowly, she turned back to face him, dignity reasserting itself in the straightening of her spine and the lifting of her chin. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a pristine handkerchief. With gentle precision, he offered it to her. "Not tonight, my dear," he murmured, his eyes holding hers. "Tonight your tears are too precious to be hidden." The clock had just struck midnight when the Duke of Thornfield guided Marianne back into the ballroom, her composure restored, though her heart still trembled with each beat. Lady Vale descended upon them immediately, her smile stretched thin across her features like varnish cracking upon old wood. "There you are, Marianne. Lady Blackwood has been asking for you. Your Grace, the Countess is positively languishing without your company." "A condition from which I am certain she will recover," Thornfield replied smoothly. "Miss Vale, might I claim another dance before the evening concludes?" Before Marianne could reply, a commotion near the center of the room drew their attention. Seraphine stood amid a circle of guests, her face flushed with more than just bridal joy, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly hushed space. "Utterly absurd, as if my own sister would attempt to secure attention on my wedding day, and from the Duke of Thornfield, no less." Her laugh was brittle, glass-like. "Poor Marianne, always so desperate for notice." Lady Vale's face drained of color. "Excuse me, Your Grace, I must attend to my daughter." As she hurried away, Thornfield's expression darkened. "Your sister appears to have partaken too liberally of the champagne." "Seraphine has never required spirits to speak her mind," Marianne replied quietly, "though she usually exercises more discretion regarding her audience." The Duke's hand came to rest at the small of her back, a gentle pressure that somehow steadied her. "Shall we approach, or would you prefer to withdraw from this particular scene?" Before she could answer, Seraphine's gaze found them at the periphery of the crowd. Her eyes narrowed, her mouth twisting into something that only superficially resembled a smile. "Ah, and here is the lady herself, returned from her private tête-à-tête with His Grace." Seraphine's voice rang with theatrical solicitude. "Dear sister, you must be more careful. The Duke is known for his fleeting interests in unusual specimens. Once the novelty wears off, you'll find yourself more alone than before." A collective inhalation swept through the assembly. Lord Blackwood moved to his bride's side, murmuring something urgent in her ear, but Seraphine shook him off impatiently. "Come now, let us not pretend," she continued, her voice pitched to carry. "We all know Marianne is here merely by obligation. Mother insisted, though I warned her it would cast a pall over the festivities. Some people simply lack the constitution for joy." Marianne stood motionless, each word striking like a physical blow, yet something in the Duke's steady presence beside her prevented her from retreating into the shadows, as she had done so many times before. "Lady Blackwood," Thornfield said, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade through silk, "you do yourself no credit with such remarks." Seraphine's smile faltered. "Your Grace, I merely state what everyone knows to be true. My sister has always cultivated an air of martyred silence. It's her particular talent. I find, madam, that those who speak most confidently of what everyone knows are often those who know least themselves." The Duke stepped forward, placing himself between Marianne and the gathering crowd. "And as for talents, I have observed that true accomplishment seldom announces itself so stridently." Lord Blackwood moved forward with visible relief. "Well said, Your Grace. My dear," he addressed Seraphine, "perhaps we should commence the final toast. Our guests will soon be departing." But Seraphine was not to be deterred. "How gallant you are, Your Grace, to champion my sister so. One might almost think—" She paused, her eyes widening with sudden malicious inspiration. "But of course, how did I not see it before? Mother has been angling for this match all along. The sad spinster and the solitary Duke, what a perfect arrangement of convenience." Lady Vale gasped audibly. "Seraphine, you forget yourself entirely." "Do I?" Seraphine tossed her golden head, the diamonds in her tiara catching the light like shards of ice. "Was it not you, Mother, who instructed Marianne to wear that particular shade of blue tonight? "It brings out your eyes, dear," you said, as if anything could make her remarkable enough to capture a duke. A terrible silence fell over the assembly. Marianne felt the weight of every gaze, the pressure of judgment and pity and cruel curiosity. Her chest constricted until she could scarcely draw breath. Then, like a warm current cutting through icy waters, the Duke's voice rose clear and measured. "I find Miss Vale quite remarkable enough without any maternal stratagems," he said, turning to face the room at large. "Indeed, I consider myself fortunate to have discovered her true worth, where others have been blind to it." He turned back to Marianne, his expression softening as he met her gaze. "Miss Vale, would you grant me a moment of private conversation? There is a matter of some importance I wish to discuss." The murmurs rose again, a tide of speculation washing through the ballroom. Lady Vale stepped forward, panic evident in her quick movements. "Your Grace, I must insist—" "You must insist upon nothing, madam," Thornfield interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Your daughter is of age and fully capable of deciding whether to grant my request." All eyes turned to Marianne, who stood at the center of more attention than she had received in all her previous 26 years combined. The familiar urge to retreat, to disappear into the background, washed over her with almost overwhelming force. But then she looked at the Duke, at his steady gaze and the quiet strength he offered, and found herself nodding. "I would be honored to speak with you, Your Grace." With a gentleness that belied his commanding presence, he offered his arm. "Then shall we seek a moment's privacy in the library? I believe Lord Blackwood would not object." The young lord, clearly eager to move past the scene his bride had created, nodded quickly. "Of course, Your Grace. Jenkins will show you the way." As the Duke escorted her from the ballroom, Marianne was acutely aware of Seraphine's stunned expression, of her mother's calculating gaze, of the 100 pairs of eyes following their exit. Yet for once she found she did not care what they might think or say. For the first time in her memory, she was walking towards something rather than retreating from it. The library at Blackwood Manor stood in stark contrast to the opulent ballroom, its dignified silence a balm to Marianne's overwrought nerves. Rows of leather-bound volumes lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines gleaming dully in the lamplight. A fire burned low in the grate, casting a warm glow across the room's rich furnishings. Jenkins, the Blackwood butler, lit additional lamps and then withdrew with a discreet bow, closing the heavy oak door behind him. Alone with the Duke, Marianne found herself suddenly uncertain. She moved toward one of the tall windows, gazing out at the moonlit gardens while gathering her composure. "Your sister's behavior was unconscionable," Thornfield said after a moment, his voice gentle yet firm. "You bore it with remarkable dignity." Marianne turned to face him, her hands clasped tightly before her. "I have had considerable practice, Your Grace." "So I observed." He crossed to a sideboard, where decanters stood in orderly array. "May I offer you a glass of sherry? I believe the situation warrants it." At her nod, he poured 2 small glasses, bringing one to her with careful courtesy. Their fingers brushed as she accepted it, sending a curious warmth through her despite the briefness of the contact. "I must apologize," she said, after taking a modest sip. "You have been drawn into a family drama, not of your making." "On the contrary," he replied, "I inserted myself quite deliberately." He studied her over the rim of his glass. "Though I confess, I did not anticipate quite such a theatrical response from Lady Blackwood. Seraphine has always commanded attention most effectively." A hint of rueful affection colored her tone. Even as children, she possessed an instinct for the dramatic moment. While you developed an instinct for fading into the background, it was not a question. Marianne moved to one of the leather armchairs positioned before the fireplace, sinking into it with uncharacteristic abandon. It seemed the most peaceful course. Yet peace purchased at such cost can hardly be worth the price. Thornfield took the chair opposite her, setting his glass upon the small table between them. "Miss Vale, I must speak plainly. Your family's treatment of you borders on cruelty, though I suspect they would be shocked to hear it characterized as such." "They mean no harm," she said automatically, the defense worn smooth from years of use. "Perhaps not," he acknowledged, "yet harm is done nonetheless. To witness your quiet fortitude in the face of such casual dismissal," he paused, something like anger flashing briefly in his eyes. "It stirs protective instincts I had not known I possessed." The fire popped and hissed in the grate. Outside, the faint strains of music indicated that the celebration continued unabated despite the bride's outburst. "Your Grace," Marianne began hesitantly, "I am deeply sensible of your kindness this evening, but I must ask, why have you taken such interest in my situation? We are strangers, after all." Are we? He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. I have observed you at 3 separate social functions this season, Miss Vale. Each time I noted the same quality that struck me tonight, a genuine presence amid artifice. You do not perform your life, you live it, even when that life proves difficult. She felt the color rise in her cheeks. You noticed me before tonight? I did. His smile was brief, but warm. Though I failed to secure an introduction until now, your mother is remarkably adept at steering eligible gentlemen toward your sister. You cannot blame her, Marianne said, her voice soft. Seraphine is beautiful, accomplished, and entirely conventional, he finished. A perfect society bride, groomed to reflect her husband's status rather than reveal her own character. He set down his empty glass with a decisive click. Miss Vale, may I speak even more directly? Her heart quickened. Please do. I am 37 years old, he began. I have inherited a title I never expected to bear, following the deaths of my cousin and his son. The responsibilities of the dukedom are considerable, the scrutiny unrelenting. I find I have little patience left for social games, and even less for matrimonial schemes, involving vapid debutantes or calculating mamas. Marianne listened, transfixed by the unaccustomed candor in his voice. What I desire, he continued, is a companion of intelligence and genuine feeling. Someone who understands that true nobility has nothing to do with titles and everything to do with character. He paused, then added quietly, someone like you, Miss Vale. The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Marianne felt as though she were standing at the edge of a precipice, exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. Your Grace, she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper, we have known each other but a few hours, and yet I feel I have glimpsed more of your true nature in those hours than I might discern in months of conventional courtship. He rose from his chair and moved to kneel before her, taking her hand in his. I do not propose marriage tonight, Miss Vale. That would indeed be precipitous. But I do request your permission to call upon you properly in the coming days. To what purpose, sir? She asked, though in her heart she already knew. To discover whether the connection I believe exists between us might flourish, given time and proper attention. His thumb traced a gentle circle on the back of her gloved hand. Would you grant me that opportunity? The door to the library opened abruptly, admitting Lady Vale with an expression of barely contained alarm. She paused at the threshold, taking in the scene before her. The Duke kneeling at Marianne's feet, their hands joined, their faces close. Marianne, she gasped, your sister is asking for you. The final toast is about to commence. Thornfield rose smoothly to his feet, though he retained possession of Marianne's hand. Lady Vale, your timing is most inopportune. I was just requesting your daughter's permission to call upon her. Lady Vale's expression underwent a remarkable transformation, shock giving way to calculation, and then to a smile of such sudden warmth that Marianne scarcely recognized her mother. Your Grace, how unexpected! She swept into the room, all flutter and flustered pleasure. Naturally, we would be honored by your attention to our dear Marianne, though I fear you have caught us quite unprepared. Had we known of your interest earlier, then I suspect Miss Vale would have been presented to me in a very different light, he interrupted dryly. As it happens, I prefer to form my impressions without interference. Lady Vale's smile faltered only slightly. Of course, Your Grace, Marianne, you have not yet given His Grace an answer. Marianne felt suspended between worlds, the familiar one in which she existed as an afterthought, and this new realm, where she stood at the center of attention, valued for herself alone. The Duke's eyes held hers, patient yet expectant. I would welcome your call, Your Grace, she said at last, her voice steadier than she had anticipated. Something like relief flickered across his features. Excellent. Then I shall present myself at your home tomorrow at 2 o'clock, if that is convenient. Perfectly convenient, Lady Vale answered, before Marianne could speak. Now, we really must return to the celebration. The bride awaits. The Duke's carriage arrived at Vale House precisely as the mantel clock struck 2 the following afternoon. Marianne, seated in the drawing-room with an untouched volume of poetry in her lap, heard the clip of hooves on the cobblestones and felt her pulse quicken in response. Since returning home in the early hours of the morning, she had existed in a state of dreamlike confusion. Her mother, transformed by the prospect of a ducal connection, had alternated between effusive predictions of Marianne's future glory and sharp critiques of her current deficiencies. Your posture, my dear. A duchess must never slouch, she had admonished over breakfast, and we really must order new gowns. That blue ensemble served its purpose admirably, but his grace will expect variety." Marianne had listened in silence, feeling strangely detached from her mother's machinations. The Duke's interest, whatever its true nature, had nothing to do with her gowns or her mother's sudden ambitions. This knowledge provided a curious shield against Lady Vale's renewed attention. Now, as Jenkins announced the Duke's arrival, Marianne rose to greet him with a composure that surprised even herself. Thornfield entered the drawing room with measured steps, his tall figure imposing yet not intimidating. He wore a perfectly tailored morning coat of deep blue, his cravat arranged with elegant simplicity. In his hand, he carried a small package wrapped in cream-colored paper. "Miss Vale," he said, bowing over her hand with formal precision, "I trust you are well rested after last night's festivities." "As well as one might expect, Your Grace." She offered him a small smile. "Please, be seated." Lady Vale, who had been hovering near the doorway, stepped forward with a rustle of silk. "Your Grace, what an honor to receive you in our modest home. May I offer refreshment? Tea, perhaps, or something stronger?" "Tea would be most welcome, thank you." The Duke seated himself in the armchair adjacent to Marianne's place on the settee. Once Lady Vale had departed to instruct the servants, he spoke in a lower tone. "Your mother seems in remarkably high spirits today." "Indeed." Marianne smoothed her skirts, a gesture born more of habit than necessity. "You have wrought quite a transformation in her perception of my worth." "Then her vision is as faulty as I suspected," he replied, his expression serious. "Your worth has not altered in the slightest. It is merely that she now perceives what should have been evident all along." The quiet conviction in his voice warmed her more than any of her mother's newfound enthusiasm. "I have brought you something," he continued, extending the small package. "A modest token, but one I hope might please you." Marianne accepted it with murmured thanks, untying the slender ribbon that secured the wrapping. Inside lay a slim volume bound in green leather, its title embossed in gold, "Landscape Studies of the English Countryside." "You mentioned last night that you paint," Thornfield explained. "This contains reproductions of works by several contemporary artists whose technique I admire. I thought it might interest you." Marianne opened the book carefully, her breath catching as she turned the pages. The landscapes were rendered with extraordinary sensitivity, rolling hills bathed in golden light, ancient trees silhouetted against stormy skies, quiet streams reflecting cloud-dappled heavens. "This is beautiful," she said, genuine pleasure suffusing her voice. "Thank you, Your Grace. It is a most thoughtful gift. I am gratified that it meets with your approval." His expression softened as he watched her lingering over a particularly striking image of a lone oak tree withstanding a gale. "That one reminds me of you." She looked up, startled. "Of me?" "Indeed, steadfast despite adversity, possessing a quiet strength that many might overlook at first glance." Before Marianne could respond to this unexpected compliment, Lady Vale returned, followed by a maid bearing a silver tea tray. "Here we are," Lady Vale announced brightly. "Our finest Darjeeling, Your Grace, and some of Cook's butter biscuits. Marianne, do pour for His Grace." The ritual of tea service provided Marianne with a welcome opportunity to gather her thoughts. As she handed the Duke his cup, their fingers brushed once more, and again she felt that curious spark of connection. "I understand from Lady Westmoreland that you are planning a house party at Thornfield Court next month, Your Grace," Lady Vale remarked, settling herself into a chair with a strategically direct view of both her daughter and their illustrious visitor. "Such a magnificent estate by all accounts." "It has its charms," he acknowledged, his tone non-committal, "though I find the formal gardens somewhat lacking in imagination." "Miss Vale, I wonder if you might lend your artistic eye to their improvement." Marianne nearly spilled her tea. That is, I have no training in landscape design, Your Grace." "Yet you have an artist's sensitivity to composition and light," he countered. "Sometimes the untutored eye sees possibilities that convention might overlook." Lady Vale leaned forward eagerly. "Marianne would be delighted to assist in any way, Your Grace. Perhaps we might accept an invitation to your house party. The change of air would do her complexion a world of good." Thornfield's expression cooled perceptibly. "I had thought rather to request Miss Vale's company on a tour of the gardens here in London first. Kew Gardens presents an excellent study in both formal and naturalistic design." "How kind," Marianne interjected, before her mother could press further. "I should enjoy that very much, if weather permits." "Then it is settled." He turned to Lady Vale with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "With your permission, madam, I should like to escort Miss Vale to Kew Gardens tomorrow afternoon. My carriage will call for her at 1 o'clock. Chaperoned, of course," Lady Vale stipulated, though her tone made it clear that she would hardly stand in the way of a duke's wishes. Naturally, my aunt, Lady Harrington, has agreed to accompany us. He set down his cup with a decisive click. Now I have taken enough of your time for one day. Miss Vale, I look forward to our excursion tomorrow. As he rose to take his leave, Marianne felt a curious mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The Duke's interest remained a mystery she could not quite unravel, yet she found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet intensity and unexpected kindness. At the door he paused, taking her hand once more. Until tomorrow, Miss Vale. Until tomorrow, Your Grace. She curtsied, the gesture automatic yet somehow newly meaningful. When the door closed behind him, Lady Vale turned to her daughter with an expression of barely contained exultation. Well, I must say, Marianne, you have surprised us all. A duke, and such a particular one too. Lady Blackwood will be beside herself when she hears of it. Mother, Marianne said quietly, please do not write to Seraphine about this. The Duke has shown me some kindness, nothing more. I would not have it twisted into something that might cause my sister pain. Lady Vale waved away this concern with an impatient gesture. Nonsense! Seraphine has made her match. It is your turn now, and a far grander one than any of us anticipated. She clasped her hands together, eyes alight with calculated pleasure. We must begin preparations immediately. Your wardrobe requires complete renovation. A duke's bride must be beyond reproach in every detail. Mother, please. The Duke has not yet, Lady Vale interrupted, already lost in her plans. But he will, my dear. Mark my words, no man of his station pays such attention without serious intent. By summer's end, you shall be a duchess. Kew Gardens unfurled before them in verdant splendor, the May sunshine casting dappled patterns through the canopy of newly leafed trees. Lady Harrington, the Duke's aunt, walked several paces ahead, her parasol tilted at a precise angle that somehow managed to shield her complexion while permitting her an unobstructed view of the path ahead. My aunt's discretion is legendary, Thornfield remarked as he guided Marianne along a winding path bordered by rhododendrons in riotous bloom. She will afford us privacy while maintaining all proper appearances. Indeed, Lady Harrington seemed to possess an uncanny ability to remain simultaneously present and absent, close enough to satisfy propriety, yet far enough to allow for genuine conversation. She seems a most accommodating chaperone, Marianne observed, adjusting her own parasol against a sudden shaft of sunlight. Have you known her long, Your Grace? All my life, he replied with a rare smile. She is my mother's sister, and has been more of a parent to me than either my father or mother ever managed to be. My father was absorbed in his parliamentary duties, and my mother in her social obligations. It was Aunt Margaret who taught me to appreciate beauty in unexpected places. His gaze lingered on Marianne's face as he spoke these last words, causing her cheeks to warm with a blush she could not suppress. You disconcert me, sir, she admitted, focusing her attention on a particularly vivid azalea to her right. I am unaccustomed to such direct regard. Another indictment of your family's discernment, he said, his tone light yet underscored with genuine feeling. Tell me, Miss Vale, what do you think of these formal gardens? Do they please your artistic sensibility? Grateful for the change of subject, Marianne considered the geometrically arranged flower beds that stretched before them in a precise pattern. They are undeniably impressive, she said after a moment, yet I find I prefer the wilder sections of the garden, where nature is guided rather than commanded. Exactly so. He nodded with evident satisfaction. That is precisely my feeling regarding the gardens at Thornfield Court. The previous Duke was fond of mathematical precision in all things. The result is technically faultless, but ultimately soulless. They had reached a small ornamental lake where water lilies floated on the still surface like stars in a green firmament. Lady Harrington had paused at a respectful distance, apparently absorbed in the contemplation of a marble statue representing some classical deity. I should like to show you Thornfield Court, the Duke said suddenly, not as part of a house party with its tedious social obligations, but privately, or as privately as propriety allows. He turned to face her directly. Would that interest you, Miss Vale? It would, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Very much. He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his austere features. Excellent. I shall speak with your mother about arrangements. Perhaps next week if your schedule permits. My schedule is remarkably empty, Your Grace, she replied, with a touch of self-deprecating humor. I am not in great demand for social engagements. A state of affairs that will soon change, I suspect. He offered his arm to lead her around the perimeter of the lake. "Already Lady Westmoreland has inquired most particularly about my interest in you." Marianne tensed. "What did you tell her?" "That my attentions to Miss Vale were precisely what they appeared to be, the natural interest of a gentleman who had discovered a lady of uncommon merit." His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, a brief, reassuring pressure. "I do not play games, Marianne, nor do I court scandal for its own sake. My interest in you is genuine and honourable." The use of her given name, the first time he had spoken it, sent a tremor through her that had nothing to do with impropriety and everything to do with the growing connection between them. "I believe you," she said simply. They walked in companionable silence for several minutes, the gentle splashing of a nearby fountain providing a soothing counterpoint to the distant calls of other visitors. "Your sister's wedding was lavish," the Duke observed eventually. "Lord Blackwood seems a decent sort, if somewhat under his bride's influence." "Edward is kind-hearted," Marianne agreed. "He genuinely loves Seraphine, though I fear he does not yet fully understand her nature." "And what nature is that in your estimation?" Marianne considered carefully before answering. "Seraphine was raised to believe that beauty and charm were her only currency in the world. Mother encouraged competition between us from our earliest years, though there was never any real contest. My sister learned that triumph required someone else's defeat. It is not entirely her fault that she treats life as a series of battles to be won. You are remarkably generous toward those who have shown you little kindness," Thornfield noted, his voice softening. "It speaks to a compassion that I find increasingly rare in our society." Lady Harrington chose that moment to rejoin them, her timing impeccable as always. "The tropical house is particularly fine today," she announced, falling into step beside them. "The orchids are in magnificent bloom. Shall we proceed in that direction?" "An excellent suggestion, Aunt," the Duke replied, including Marianne in his warm glance. Miss Vale was just demonstrating her capacity for seeing beauty where others might miss it. They spent another hour wandering the gardens, conversation flowing with increasing ease among the three of them. Lady Harrington proved to be a woman of considerable wit and intelligence, her observations on both botany and society revealing a mind that remained vigorously engaged with the world despite her advanced years. As they returned to the Duke's carriage, Lady Harrington took Marianne's hand in both of hers. "My dear, you must come to tea at my house on Thursday next. I should like to show you my collection of botanical illustrations. Richard tells me you have some talent with watercolors." "You are too kind, my lady," Marianne replied, genuinely touched by the invitation. "I should be delighted to view your collection." "Then it is settled." Lady Harrington turned to her nephew with a knowing smile. "You may escort Miss Vale, Richard, provided you promise not to monopolize her attention entirely. I wish to form my own impressions." "As if you have not already done so, Aunt," he replied with good-humored resignation. "Very well, I shall endeavor to make myself scarce for at least a portion of the visit." As the carriage bore them back toward Vale House, Marianne found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken in the space of a mere 2 days. From invisible sister to the object of a duke's attention, it seemed scarcely credible. Yet the evidence sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring in its reality. Whatever came of this unexpected connection, Marianne knew with sudden clarity that she would never again accept the role of shadow that her family had assigned her. The Duke's regard had awakened something in her that could not be returned to dormancy, a sense of her own worth independent of others' assessment. It was a fragile thing still, this newfound self-awareness, but growing stronger with each moment spent in his company. The invitation to visit Thornfield Court arrived on gilt-edged stationery, the ducal crest embossed in deep crimson at its head. Lady Vale received it with trembling hands, her eyes widening as she scanned its contents. "A personal invitation from the Duke himself," she breathed, passing the letter to Marianne, "for a 3-day visit next week. My dear, this exceeds even my most optimistic expectations." Marianne read the formal lines with care, noting the precise, elegant script that she now recognized as the Duke's own hand, rather than that of a secretary. He requested the pleasure of both Lady Vale's and Miss Vale's company from Tuesday until Friday, mentioning specifically his desire to show Marianne the gardens and picture gallery. The postscript, added in a slightly less formal tone, indicated that Lady Harrington would also be in residence to ensure all proprieties were observed. "We must begin preparations immediately," Lady Vale declared, already mentally cataloguing the wardrobe requirements for such a significant visit. Your new walking dress should be ready by Monday, and the blue evening gown with the silver embroidery. But we shall need more. A riding habit, perhaps. Does His Grace expect you to ride? I have no idea what His Grace expects, Mother, Marianne replied, folding the invitation carefully. Nor do I intend to present myself as something I am not. If the Duke wishes to know me, then let him know me as I am. Lady Vale paused in her excited planning, regarding her elder daughter with a mixture of exasperation and bewilderment. Marianne, you cannot mean to squander such an opportunity through some misguided notion of authenticity. A gentleman of the Duke's station expects certain accomplishments in his future Duchess. The Duke has not spoken of marriage, Marianne reminded her, though her pulse quickened at the mere suggestion. He has shown me kindness and attention, nothing more. Nonsense. Lady Vale waved away this objection with an impatient gesture. Her Duke does not invite a young lady to his country estate, chaperoned or not, without serious intentions. Mark my words, he will make an offer before summer's end. The possibility, once articulated, lingered in Marianne's thoughts like perfume in still air. She had not allowed herself to contemplate such an outcome, focusing instead on the immediate pleasure of the Duke's company, without daring to project beyond their next meeting. Now, alone in her bedchamber that evening, she permitted herself to imagine what life as the Duchess of Thornfield might entail. The title itself meant little to her. It was the man who bore it that had captured her interest, his quiet intensity, his genuine appreciation for her thoughts and feelings, his ability to see beyond the surface to the person beneath. These qualities drew her to him far more than his wealth or status. Yet she could not entirely dismiss the practical implications of such a match. As Thornfield's Duchess, she would wield considerable influence in society, the very society that had so long overlooked her existence. The irony was not lost on her. Would Seraphine congratulate her sincerely, or would bitterness taint her sister's response? Would her mother finally regard her with genuine pride rather than the calculated assessment of a social strategist? Would she herself remain unchanged by such elevation, or would the power of the position eventually reshape her character, as it did so many others? These questions occupied her mind throughout the days of preparation, lending a dreamlike quality to the fittings and packings and endless instructions from her suddenly attentive mother. By the time the Duke's carriage arrived to convey them to Thornfield Court, Marianne felt as though she was stepping into a story authored by someone else, a narrative in which she had been unexpectedly cast as the heroine rather than a supporting character. The journey passed pleasantly enough, Lady Vale maintaining a stream of conversation that required little response beyond occasional murmurs of agreement. The countryside unfolded before them in verdant splendor, the late spring landscape lush with promise. "We are approaching the estate now," the coachman announced as they turned onto a long, tree-lined avenue. "Thornfield Court lies just beyond that rise." Marianne leaned forward slightly, eager for her first glimpse of the Duke's ancestral home. When it came into view, she could not suppress a small gasp of appreciation. Thornfield Court presented a harmonious blend of architectural styles, its central section, clearly Elizabethan with later Georgian additions, extending from either side. Mullioned windows caught the afternoon light, while ivy climbed portions of the honey-colored stone walls. The overall effect was one of stately elegance without ostentation, a house that had evolved organically over centuries rather than been built to impress in a single era. The carriage swept up the curved driveway to deposit them at the main entrance, where the Duke himself awaited them, a sight that sent a curious flutter through Marianne's chest. "Lady Vale, Miss Vale." He stepped forward to assist them from the carriage, his hand warm and steady as it clasped Marianne's. "Welcome to Thornfield Court. I trust your journey was comfortable." "Most comfortable, Your Grace," Lady Vale replied before Marianne could speak. "Such magnificent countryside, and your estate so imposing yet welcoming, quite the perfect balance." "You are too kind." The Duke's attention remained fixed on Marianne. "And you, Miss Vale? What are your first impressions?" "That the house suits its master," she replied honestly, dignified without pretension, and with a sense of history that has not calcified into mere tradition. Something like pleasure flickered in his eyes, perceptively observed. "I hope you will find equal interest in the interior." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The entrance hall rose 2 stories, its hammer-beam ceiling reminiscent of a medieval great hall. Portraits of Thornfield ancestors lined the walls, their expressions ranging from severe to benevolent, depending on the artistic conventions of their era. "The Tudor section is the oldest," the Duke explained as he led them through to a drawing room where tea had been arranged. Though archaeological evidence suggests a Saxon dwelling once occupied the site, each generation has left its mark, for better or worse. Lady Harrington awaited them in the drawing room, her greeting warm and genuine. "My dear Miss Vale, how delightful to see you again. And Lady Vale, welcome to Thornfield Court. I trust Richard has not overwhelmed you with architectural history already." "Not at all," Lady Vale demurred, settling herself into a chair with a rustle of silk. "His Grace's knowledge of his ancestral home is most impressive, and dreadfully dull if allowed to continue unchecked," Thornfield admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Aunt Margaret is wise to intervene before I subject you to the fascinating history of our 17th-century plumbing innovations." Tea passed pleasantly, with Lady Harrington skillfully drawing out Lady Vale on neutral topics, while the Duke occasionally caught Marianne's eye with a glance that suggested shared amusement at the social dance being performed. "Perhaps Miss Vale would enjoy seeing the gardens before the light fades," he suggested as the tea things were cleared away. "The western quadrant is particularly fine at this hour." "An excellent notion," Lady Harrington agreed. "Lady Vale and I shall join you shortly, after I have shown her to her rooms. I imagine she would welcome a moment to refresh herself after the journey." Thus it was that Marianne found herself walking beside the Duke through formal gardens that gradually gave way to more naturalistic landscaping as they moved away from the house. "You mentioned wanting to redesign these gardens," she recalled as they paused beside a stone balustrade overlooking a series of terraces that descended toward a small lake. "Do you find them too rigid?" "I find them strangled by their own precision," he replied, his gaze taking in the geometric patterns below. "Like a conversation where every response is predetermined, I should prefer something with more spontaneity, more truth. Yet there is a certain security in such order," she observed. "One always knows what to expect. Security purchased at the expense of discovery." He turned to face her directly. "Would you not rather be surprised by beauty than reassured by symmetry?" The question seemed to extend beyond mere landscaping, touching on something fundamental about how one might choose to live. Marianne considered it carefully. "Perhaps the ideal lies somewhere between," she suggested. "A framework that provides stability, within which unexpected joys might flourish." The 3 days at Thornfield Court unfolded with a gentle rhythm that Marianne found increasingly beguiling. Each morning brought new discoveries: the extensive library with its collection of illustrated botanical volumes, the music room where a Broadwood grand piano waited in silent invitation, the picture gallery housing portraits and landscapes spanning 4 centuries. The Duke proved an attentive host, seeming to anticipate her interests before she expressed them. When she mentioned a fondness for early English watercolorists, he produced a portfolio of Turner sketches acquired by his grandfather. When she admired the lilacs blooming in the East Garden, a vase of them appeared in her bedchamber that evening. Lady Vale observed these attentions with poorly disguised triumph, while Lady Harrington watched with the quiet assessment of one who has seen many social campaigns waged and won. On their final evening, the Duke arranged a small dinner party, inviting several neighboring families to meet his guests. Marianne, wearing her new gown of celestial blue silk with its subtle silver embroidery, found herself the object of curious scrutiny from ladies who had clearly heard rumors of the Duke's interest. "Miss Vale, I understand you are an accomplished watercolorist," remarked Lady Pembroke, a matron of formidable aspect whose daughter had once been considered a potential match for the Duke. "How delightful that His Grace shares your artistic sensibilities." "I would not claim accomplishment, merely enthusiasm," Marianne replied, detecting the subtle barb beneath the ostensible compliment. "His Grace has been kind enough to show me his family's collection, which has been most instructive." "So kind," echoed Miss Pembroke, a pretty blonde whose smile did not reach her eyes. "His Grace has always been known for his charitable interests." Before Marianne could respond to this more overt slight, the Duke himself appeared at her side, as if summoned by some sixth sense that alerted him to potential discomfort. "Miss Vale, I believe I promised to show you the conservatory after dinner," he said, offering his arm. "The night-blooming cereus is expected to flower this evening, a rare event worth witnessing." Lady Pembroke's eyebrows rose fractionally. "How fascinating. Perhaps we might all enjoy such a botanical curiosity. Another time, perhaps," the Duke replied with cool courtesy. "Tonight's bloom is particularly delicate and best appreciated in quieter circumstances. I'm sure you understand." Without waiting for a response, he led Marianne away, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. Once they were out of earshot, he spoke in a lower tone. "Forgive my intervention, but I recognized Lady Pembroke's expression. She was preparing to deploy her most cutting observations about your background and my apparent lapse in judgment. You need not protect me from such barbs, Your Grace," Marianne said, though she was touched by his concern. "I have endured far worse from my own family. That does not make it acceptable." His voice carried an edge of genuine anger. "Nor does it obligate you to tolerate it in my home." They had reached a glass structure extending from the east wing of the house, its interior warm and humid compared to the cool evening air outside. The scent of exotic blooms filled the space, heavy and sweet in the enclosed atmosphere. "Here we are," the Duke said, his manner softening as he guided her toward a section where potted plants stood arranged on tiered shelving. "The Sirius. You see how the bud is beginning to unfurl? By midnight it will be fully open, a spectacle that lasts only until dawn." Marianne leaned closer to observe the pale bloom emerging from its protective sheath. How extraordinary to invest such energy in a display so brief, yet all the more precious for its brevity, would you not agree? He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Some experiences need not be prolonged to be profound. The quiet intensity in his voice drew her gaze from the flower to his face. In the diffuse light of the conservatory, his expression was softer than usual, the habitual reserve replaced by something more vulnerable. "Miss Vale, Marianne," he paused, as if weighing his next words with unusual care. "These past weeks have brought me more genuine pleasure than I had thought possible. Your presence has illuminated aspects of life that had grown dull through familiarity or neglect." Her heart began to beat with uncomfortable force. "I am glad to have brought you pleasure, Your Grace." "Richard," he corrected gently, "when we are not performing for society's benefit, I should like to hear my name on your lips." "Richard," she repeated, the intimate syllables strange yet somehow right. "You have shown me equal kindness. Indeed, you have given me a gift beyond measure, the gift of being truly seen. Is that how you feel? Seen?" He moved slightly closer, his gaze never leaving her face. "It is a curious coincidence, for you have granted me the same gift. Before you, I moved through society behind a mask so habitual I had forgotten it was not my true face." Outside the conservatory, the sounds of the dinner party continued, distant laughter, the occasional strain of music from the small orchestra engaged for the evening. Within their glass sanctuary, however, a different atmosphere prevailed, intimate, expectant, charged with unspoken possibility. "Marianne," he took her hands in his, the gesture both gentle and deliberate. "I did not invite you to Thornfield Court merely to show you my gardens or my art collection. I brought you here because I wished you to see my home, to understand the context of my life, before I ask you to consider sharing it." The moment expanded around her, crystalline in its clarity. She knew with absolute certainty what would follow, yet still found herself trembling slightly in anticipation. "What I am trying to say, with perhaps less eloquence than the moment deserves, is that I have grown to care for you deeply." His thumbs traced small circles on the backs of her hands, the touch sending ripples of awareness through her entire being. "Your intelligence, your quiet strength, your compassion, despite difficulties that would embitter many, these qualities have captured my heart entirely." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that he held without immediately opening. "I know that our acquaintance has been brief by conventional standards. Society would counsel a longer courtship, more public appearances together, a gradual progression toward this moment." "Society counsels many things that bring little joy," Marianne replied, finding her voice at last. "And time is an imperfect measure of connection." His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. "Precisely so. Then let me speak plainly. Marianne Vale, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not for my title or my fortune, but for the simple reason that I believe we might build a life of genuine meaning together." He opened the box to reveal a ring, unlike any Marianne had seen before. Not a traditional diamond, but an oval sapphire surrounded by small pearls in an antique gold setting. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "A woman of remarkable intellect and kindness, whom I think would have recognized a kindred spirit in you." Marianne looked from the ring to his face, searching for any hint of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she allowed the full force of her own feelings to surface, feelings she had carefully tempered until this moment. "Yes," she said simply, "with all my heart, yes." His hands were steady, as he removed the ring from its velvet nest and slipped it onto her finger. It fit as though made for her, the deep blue of the sapphire complementing the silver embroidery on her gown. "Not tonight, my dear," he murmured, repeating the words that had first changed the course of her life at Seraphine's wedding. "Not tonight will you hide your light or your tears, not ever again." And then he kissed her, a gentle press of lips that deepened gradually into something more profound. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while hers found their way to his shoulders, completing the circuit of connection between them. When they finally drew apart, the Sirius blossom had opened fully, its white petals luminous in the dim light of the conservatory. The coincidence, or perhaps providence, of its timing was not lost on either of them. "We should return to our guests," Richard said eventually, though he made no immediate move to release her. "Your mother will be wondering where you are, and my aunt has undoubtedly been running interference for as long as propriety allows." "Yes, of course." Marianne smoothed her skirts, suddenly conscious of how their absence might appear. "Though I confess I am reluctant to share our news immediately. Could we not keep it between ourselves, just for tonight?" He studied her with a perceptive gaze. "You fear your mother's reaction? Not disapproval, surely, but perhaps the particular quality of her approval?" "You understand perfectly," she admitted. "Once our engagement is announced, she will claim it as the culmination of her maternal strategy, evidence that she was right to focus her attention on Seraphine all these years, since I have managed to secure an even more advantageous match." "Then we shall wait until morning," he decided, offering his arm once more. "Tonight belongs to us alone. Tomorrow we can face the congratulations, the speculation, the inevitable remarks about your unexpected good fortune. And Seraphine's reaction," Marianne added quietly. "That will be complicated." "Married? To the Duke of Thornfield?" Seraphine's voice rose several octaves above its usual register, the words echoing through the Vale House drawing room, where she had arrived in a flurry of expensive silks and barely contained agitation. "Mother, this cannot be serious." Lady Vale, who had been savouring her elder daughter's engagement with all the satisfaction of a military strategist whose unconventional gambit had succeeded beyond expectation, drew herself up with newfound dignity. "I assure you, Seraphine, it is entirely serious. The Duke made his offer at Thornfield Court and Marianne has accepted. The announcement will appear in tomorrow's papers." Seraphine whirled to face Marianne, who stood near the window, the morning light catching the sapphire on her finger. "How have you managed this? What artifice did you employ to secure his interest? The Duke has refused countless eligible young ladies, yet somehow you—" She broke off, gesturing expansively at Marianne's modest appearance. "Your sister employed no artifice," Lady Vale interjected smoothly. "His Grace simply recognized qualities in Marianne that others have perhaps overlooked. The Duke mentioned specifically her artistic sensibilities and her refreshing genuineness." "Genuineness?" Seraphine repeated incredulously. "Is that the fashionable term for plainness now? Really, Mother, you cannot expect me to believe the Duke of Thornfield has fallen in love with Marianne's character. What you believe is immaterial." Richard's voice came from the doorway, where he stood observing the scene with cool composure. "The facts remain unchanged by your incredulity, Lady Blackwood." Seraphine paled slightly, caught in her uncharitable outburst. "Your Grace, I was merely expressing surprise at this unexpected development. You must admit, it is rather sudden." "When certainty exists, delay serves no purpose," he replied, crossing the room to stand beside Marianne. His hand came to rest at the small of her back, a gesture of support that did not escape Seraphine's notice. "Your sister has done me the honor of accepting my proposal. I had hoped her family might share in our happiness." Seraphine's expression underwent a rapid series of transformations, shock giving way to calculation, then settling into a brittle simulacrum of pleasure. "Of course we share in your happiness, Your Grace. It is simply so unexpected. Marianne has always been so retiring, so content in the background. To imagine her as a duchess requires no imagination whatsoever," Richard interrupted, his tone pleasant but firm. "Your sister possesses every quality necessary to excel in the role." Marianne, who had maintained her composure throughout this uncomfortable exchange, finally spoke. "Seraphine, I understand your surprise. I can scarcely believe it myself at times." She moved toward her sister, genuine affection tempering her awareness of Seraphine's difficult nature. "I hope that in time you will come to see that this match brings me true happiness, not merely social elevation." Something in her sincerity seemed to penetrate Seraphine's defensive armor. For a brief moment, a flash of the sister Marianne had once known, before competition and maternal favoritism had corrupted their relationship, appeared in Seraphine's eyes. "You truly care for him," she said, less a question than a realization. "And he for you." "Yes," Marianne replied simply. "We do." Seraphine's gaze shifted between her sister and the Duke, as if attempting to reconcile this reality with her understanding of the world. "Well," she said finally, her tone still carrying a hint of bewilderment, "I suppose congratulations are in order then." "Most gracious of you," Richard murmured, the faintest edge of irony in his voice. Lady Vale, eager to smooth over any lingering tension, stepped forward with a rustle of silk. "We must begin planning the wedding immediately. A duchess's nuptials require careful consideration. St. George's, Hanover Square would be most appropriate, I believe, and the season is already well underway, so perhaps August would be suitable." "Actually, Mother," Marianne began, catching Richard's eye, "we had discussed a quieter ceremony, perhaps at the chapel at Thornfield Court, with only family and close friends." "A private wedding?" Lady Vale looked genuinely shocked. "But my dear, you will be a duchess. Society expects a certain display." "Society's expectations are not our primary concern," Richard stated firmly. "Marianne and I prefer authenticity to spectacle. The ceremony itself matters far less than the life that follows." Seraphine, who had been watching this exchange with narrowed eyes, suddenly laughed, a short surprise sound that held genuine amusement rather than mockery. "How perfectly suited you are, both so serious, so above the frivolities that occupy the rest of us." She shook her head, golden curls bouncing with the movement. "Edward will be astonished. He wagered the Duke would remain a bachelor until at least 40. "Your husband placed wagers on my marital prospects?" Richard inquired, one eyebrow raised. "Oh, the entire club did, apparently." Seraphine waved a dismissive hand. "You were considered quite the matrimonial challenge, too discerning, too set in your ways, and entirely too immune to the usual strategies." "Yet not immune to authentic connection," he replied, his gaze returning to Marianne with a warmth that transformed his austere features. "Perhaps there is a lesson in that for the betting gentleman." The remainder of the morning passed in a curious blend of practical discussions and emotional undercurrents. Lady Vale vacillated between delight at her daughter's elevated prospects and dismay at the proposed simplicity of the wedding arrangements. Seraphine's manner thawed gradually, her initial shock giving way to a wary acceptance tinged with lingering disbelief. By the time the Duke took his leave, promising to return for dinner that evening, an uneasy truce had been established among the women of the Vale household. "Well," Lady Vale declared once the front door had closed behind him, "I must say, Marianne, you have managed to secure a most advantageous match. The Duke is perhaps not as handsome as Lord Westmoreland's son, but his title is superior, and his fortune unencumbered by debt." "How fortunate that these practical considerations align with Marianne's tender feelings," Seraphine observed dryly, arranging her skirts as she settled more comfortably into an armchair. "Though I confess, sister, I remain curious about how this attachment formed so rapidly. At my wedding you were practically invisible, and yet somehow you captured the interest of the most eligible bachelor in England." Marianne, who had been gazing out the window at Richard's retreating figure, turned to face her sister with newfound confidence. "Perhaps I was invisible because no one truly looked at me. The Duke did." "At the risk of reopening wounds, Seraphine," Lady Vale interjected, "your behavior at the wedding was hardly conducive to presenting your sister in a favorable light. Indeed, your unfortunate outburst might have drawn His Grace's attention to Marianne's quiet dignity by contrast." Seraphine flushed slightly. "I had perhaps indulged too freely in the champagne," she conceded. "But my point remains. It is extraordinary that in the space of a few weeks Marianne has progressed from overlooked spinster to future duchess." "The world is full of such ironies," Marianne replied mildly, "though I would remind you that my value as a person has not changed, merely others' perception of it." This observation silenced both her mother and sister momentarily, each woman confronted with the uncomfortable truth embedded within it. "Well," Lady Vale said at last, rising from her chair with an air of renewed purpose, "perceptions matter a great deal in our world, as you will soon discover when you assume your role as Duchess of Thornfield. We must ensure that your wardrobe and deportment reflect your new station appropriately." "Richard values authenticity above all else, Mother," Marianne reminded her gently. "I have no intention of transforming myself into someone unrecognizable simply because my circumstances have changed. Authenticity is all very well, my dear, But a certain standard is expected of a duchess. Lady Vale's tone brooked no argument. His Grace may appreciate your natural qualities, but society will be less forgiving of any deficiencies in your presentation. Seraphine, who had been observing this exchange with growing interest, suddenly laughed again, this time with something approaching genuine warmth. "Oh, Marianne, I begin to understand the Duke's fascination. You remain utterly yourself despite everything. It is rather admirable in its way." The admission, grudging though it was, represented perhaps the first sincere compliment Seraphine had offered her sister in years. Marianne acknowledged it with a small smile, recognizing the concession it represented. "Thank you, Seraphine. Your good opinion means more to me than you might imagine." "Do not become accustomed to it," her sister replied, though the words lacked their usual sting. "I fully intend to be monstrously jealous when you outrank me at every social function hereafter. Yet you will always be the beautiful one," Marianne said without bitterness. "Some hierarchies remain unchanged regardless of titles." Seraphine's expression softened fractionally. "Beauty fades, sister. Duchesses, however, endure." She rose gracefully from her chair. "Now I must return home. Edward will be wondering where I've disappeared to, and I simply cannot wait to see his expression when I tell him the Duke of Thornfield is to be my brother-in-law." After Seraphine's departure, Marianne retreated to her bedchamber, seeking solitude in which to process the morning's events. The sapphire ring caught the light as she moved, a constant reminder of the extraordinary change in her circumstances. Yet amid the wonder of Richard's love and the dazzling prospects before her, a quiet certainty provided her greatest comfort. Whatever came next, she would face it as herself, not as the shadow she had been, nor as some artificial construction of what a duchess should be, but as Marianne Vale Thornfield, finally and completely seen. The weeks preceding the wedding unfolded in a flurry of arrangements and adjustments, with Lady Vale reluctantly conceding to the couple's preference for simplicity while ensuring that certain standards of ducal propriety were maintained. The chapel at Thornfield Court would host the ceremony, but the guest list had expanded somewhat beyond the intimate gathering Marianne had initially envisioned. The Prime Minister's wife would be mortally offended if overlooked, Lady Vale insisted during one of their planning sessions. And Lord and Lady Hartington have been particular friends of the Thornfield family for generations. "Mother, we cannot possibly accommodate every social obligation," Marianne protested, reviewing the list that seemed to grow longer with each day. "The chapel seats 60 at most, and we had hoped for perhaps half that number." Richard, who had been observing this exchange with patient amusement, finally intervened. Perhaps a compromise might be reached. The ceremony itself could remain relatively private, with a larger reception to follow in the gardens, weather permitting. Lady Vale seized upon this suggestion with alacrity. "An excellent solution, Your Grace. A garden reception would be most elegant, and we could then include the broader circle without overcrowding the chapel." Marianne gave Richard a grateful smile, recognizing his diplomatic intervention for what it was, an attempt to preserve the essence of their vision while acknowledging the social realities of their position. These negotiations, however, proved merely the prelude to a far more delicate matter. 1 week before the wedding, a letter arrived from Seraphine, its contents casting a momentary shadow over the preparations. "My sister writes that she is indisposed and may be unable to attend the ceremony," Marianne informed Richard as they walked through the recently redesigned East Garden at Thornfield Court. "She expresses her deepest regrets, of course." Richard's expression remained carefully neutral. "Do you believe this indisposition to be genuine?" "I believe it to be convenient," Marianne replied after a thoughtful pause. "Seraphine has always been the center of attention in our family. To attend a ceremony where she must play a supporting role to my starring one, well, it would require a generosity of spirit she has not yet developed." "Yet she is your sister," he observed. "Would her absence not cast a pall over your happiness?" Marianne considered the question seriously, examining her own feelings with the honesty that had drawn Richard to her in the first place. "I would prefer her presence," she admitted finally. "Not because I need her approval, but because I still hope that someday we might forge a genuine sisterhood, free from the competition that has defined our relationship for so long." Richard's hand sought hers, his thumb brushing lightly over the sapphire of her engagement ring. "Then perhaps we should visit the Blackwoods before the wedding. A personal appeal might prove more effective than correspondence." "You would do that?" Marianne looked up at him with surprised gratitude. "Subject yourself to what will almost certainly be an uncomfortable encounter." "I would do far more difficult things to secure your happiness," he replied simply. "Besides, Lord Blackwood is a reasonable fellow. His influence might help sway your sister toward a more gracious response. The following day found them in the drawing room at Blackwood House, where Edward received them with genuine warmth, while Seraphine maintained a coolly polite demeanor that stopped just short of outright hostility. "How kind of you to call," she remarked after the initial pleasantries had been exchanged, "though I fear my condition makes entertaining difficult at present." "We would not dream of taxing your strength," Richard replied smoothly. "Indeed, our visit is brief by necessity, as the wedding preparations require Marianne's attention. We wished merely to express our hope that you might reconsider your decision regarding attendance." Seraphine's perfectly arched eyebrows rose slightly. "You received my letter, then? As I explained, my health is somewhat delicate at the moment." "Seraphine," Edward interjected gently, "perhaps you might speak more directly with your sister. His Grace and I could withdraw to the library for a few moments to discuss the new agricultural reforms." The suggestion, tactfully presented, was clearly designed to provide the sisters with privacy. After a moment's hesitation, Seraphine nodded her acquiescence. Once the gentleman had departed, she turned to Marianne with a sigh that seemed to release some of her rigid composure. "Well, sister, you have secured the Duke's devotion most thoroughly if he is willing to make social calls on your behalf." Marianne chose her words with care. "Richard understands that despite our complicated history, you remain important to me. He wishes our wedding day to bring me unalloyed joy, which your absence would diminish." "How considerate of His Grace," Seraphine replied, though the sarcasm in her tone had softened somewhat. "And what of you, Marianne? Do you truly desire my presence or merely wish to complete the perfect family tableau?" "I want my sister," Marianne said simply. "Not for appearance's sake, but because despite everything, I love you. I always have, even when that love was difficult to express or receive." Something in Seraphine's expression shifted, a momentary vulnerability glimpsed through the cracks in her carefully maintained facade. "You make it very hard to maintain a dignified resentment," she murmured. "It would be so much easier if you behaved like a triumphant rival." "I have never been your rival, Seraphine. That was Mother's construction, not mine." "Perhaps." Seraphine smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt, a habitual gesture when unsettled. "But you must admit, the irony is rather stark. All those years of Mother favoring me, grooming me for an advantageous marriage, only for you to secure a duke while I must content myself with a mere baron." The complaint was so characteristic of Seraphine, simultaneously petulant and revealing, that Marianne could not suppress a small smile. "Is Edward not worth a dozen dukes in your estimation? He adores you, Seraphine, truly and completely, without reservation or condition." Seraphine's gaze softened as she considered her husband. "He does, doesn't he? Despite my many difficult qualities." She sighed again, this time with genuine feeling rather than dramatic effect. "Very well, Marianne. I shall attend your wedding, though I make no promises about maintaining an entirely gracious demeanor throughout." "I would expect nothing less," Marianne replied, relief and affection mingling in her voice. "You would not be Seraphine if you did not assert your presence in some memorable fashion." This gentle teasing, reminiscent of their childhood interactions before competition had soured their relationship, drew a reluctant smile from Seraphine. "I suppose I might commission a new gown for the occasion, something suitably spectacular without quite overshadowing the bride." "A challenge worthy of your fashion sense," Marianne agreed, recognizing the concession for what it was, a tentative step toward reconciliation. When the gentleman returned, they found the sisters engaged in a conversation about dress fabrics that, while not exactly warm, lacked the earlier tension. Edward's questioning glance was met with a slight nod from Seraphine, causing his expression to clear with evident relief. "We shall, of course, be honored to attend the wedding," he confirmed, addressing Richard with the straightforward manner that characterized his interactions. "Seraphine's health has improved remarkably in the past few minutes." "Miraculous," Richard agreed, the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. "We are gratified to hear it." As they departed, Marianne felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief at Seraphine's capitulation, hope for the possibility of a genuine improvement in their relationship, and a deeper appreciation for Richard's willingness to involve himself in this complicated family dynamic for her sake. "Thank you," she said simply as their carriage pulled away from Blackwood House. He covered her hand with his own. "For what, precisely?" "For understanding that while Seraphine can be difficult, even hurtful at times, she remains part of me, part of my history and I hope my future." "Family relationships are rarely simple," he observed. his expression thoughtful. My own father and I maintained a cordial distance until his death, neither of us quite knowing how to bridge the gulf that had formed during my childhood. I would not wish for you to carry similar regrets. This glimpse into his own family history touched Marianne deeply, adding another layer to her understanding of the man she was about to marry. Like her, he had known the peculiar loneliness that could exist even within a family, the sense of being unseen or misunderstood by those who should know one best. I believe, she said after a moment's reflection, that our shared experiences of isolation may prove a foundation for something quite extraordinary between us. We know the value of true connection precisely because we have felt its absence, eloquently expressed, as always. His smile held a tenderness reserved solely for her. And now, my dear, shall we return to Thornfield Court to finalize the arrangements for a wedding that I suspect will mark not merely our union, but a new chapter for your family as well? A new chapter indeed, she agreed, her heart light with anticipation of the life they would build together, a life founded on mutual respect and genuine understanding rather than social expectations or superficial attractions, and one I am most eager to begin. The chapel at Thornfield Court glowed with the golden light of a perfect June afternoon, sunbeams filtering through stained glass to cast jewel-toned patterns across the ancient stone floor. White roses and sprigs of lavender adorned each pew, their delicate fragrance mingling with the scent of beeswax candles and centuries of prayer. Marianne stood at the entrance, her father beside her looking both proud and slightly bewildered by the unexpected elevation of his elder daughter. Her gown, a creation of ivory silk with subtle silver embroidery echoing the design of her engagement ring, fell in clean lines that emphasized her natural grace rather than conforming to the more elaborate fashions of the season. "You look beautiful, my dear," Lord Vale murmured, patting her hand where it rested on his arm, quite transformed. "Your mother has been telling everyone that she always knew you would make an exceptional match." Marianne smiled, beyond being wounded by such revisionism. "Of course she did, father. And in her way, perhaps she meant well." The music swelled, not the traditional wedding march, but a Bach piece chosen by Richard for its quiet dignity and emotional depth. As the assembled guests rose and turned expectantly toward the chapel entrance, Marianne took a deep breath and began the walk that would transform her from Miss Marianne Vale to Her Grace, the Duchess of Thornfield. Richard waited at the altar, his tall figure commanding in formal attire, his expression softening visibly as she approached. Beside him stood his cousin, Lord Harrington, as best man, while Lady Harrington watched from the front pew with undisguised satisfaction at the culmination of a match she had discreetly encouraged from its inception. In the opposite pew, Lady Vale dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, a performance of maternal sentiment practiced to perfection. Beside her, somewhat to Marianne's surprise, sat Seraphine, resplendent in a gown of pale green silk that complemented her golden beauty without overwhelming the occasion. More surprising still was the genuine smile Seraphine offered as their eyes met, not her usual practiced social expression, but something warmer and more authentic. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ancient promises and timeless vows. Marianne heard her own voice, steady and clear, pledging herself to Richard before God and these witnesses. His responses rang with equal conviction, the deep timbre of his voice filling the chapel with reassuring certainty. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Richard's kiss was both tender and possessive, a public declaration of private devotion that drew a collective sigh from the more romantic members of the congregation. The reception that followed in the gardens of Thornfield Court struck the perfect balance between elegance and genuine warmth. Lady Vale had indeed expanded the guest list considerably, yet the atmosphere remained remarkably intimate as the new Duke and Duchess moved among their guests with gracious attention. "You seem to have been born to this role," Seraphine remarked as she joined Marianne beneath a flowering arbor where the bride had withdrawn for a moment's respite. "One would never guess you spent your life in the shadows until a few months ago." "Perhaps because I am not playing a role at all," Marianne replied, studying her sister with newfound insight. "I am simply myself, albeit in rather finer surroundings than before." Seraphine considered this, her head tilted slightly to one side. "Is that the secret, then? Authenticity rather than performance?" She glanced across the garden to where Edward stood in conversation with Richard, both men laughing at some shared observation. "I have spent so long perfecting my performance that I sometimes wonder if there is an authentic self beneath it at all." The admission, unprecedented in its vulnerability, caused Marianne to reach out and take her sister's hand. "There is, Seraphine. I have glimpsed her occasionally, in your fierce loyalty to Mother, in your genuine love for Edward, even in your anger when you felt threatened. She is there, waiting to be acknowledged." Tears gathered in Seraphine's eyes, though she blinked them away with practiced composure. "Perhaps," she conceded softly, "though she may require some coaxing to emerge after so long in hiding." "Then consider this an open invitation to visit Thornfield Court whenever you wish," Marianne offered. "Away from Mother's expectations and society's scrutiny, you might find it easier to explore who you truly are, beyond who you were raised to be." The Duchess of Thornfield offering sanctuary to her difficult sister, Seraphine mused, though without her usual barb. "How very generous." "Not the Duchess," Marianne corrected gently. "Your sister, who happens to have married a duke. The title changes nothing essential between us, Seraphine." A small but significant shift occurred in Seraphine's expression, a softening, a momentary dropping of defenses. "I believe I should like to accept your invitation, sister. Perhaps next month, when Edward visits his estates in Yorkshire." "I shall look forward to it," Marianne replied, squeezing her sister's hand before releasing it. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Lady Vale, who approached with the Countess of Westmoreland in tow, both women aglow with the social triumph of the occasion. "My dear Duchess," Lady Vale began, the new title rolling off her tongue with evident satisfaction. The Countess was just remarking on the exceptional taste displayed in the arrangements. "I assured her that you personally selected every bloom." "With my husband's input, of course," Marianne replied, noting with amusement how her mother's expression flickered at this deliberate emphasis on shared decision-making rather than social display. "Richard has a remarkable eye for natural beauty." "Indeed he does," the Countess agreed with a meaningful glance toward Marianne that acknowledged the Duke's choice of bride. "Your Grace has brought a refreshing perspective to what might otherwise have been a conventional society wedding." The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes before Richard appeared at Marianne's side, his hand coming to rest at the small of her back in what had become a characteristic gesture of support. "I fear I must steal my wife away," he announced, the word wife carrying a warmth that belied its ordinary usage. "Lady Harrington is preparing to depart and wishes to offer her personal congratulations before she leaves." As he guided Marianne across the lawn toward his aunt, he spoke in a lower tone meant for her ears alone. "You have been extraordinarily patient with the social aspects of this day. I promise that once our guests depart, we shall have time truly to ourselves." "I have found it less taxing than anticipated," she admitted, "perhaps because I no longer feel I must justify my presence or apologize for taking up space." "Never again," he affirmed, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity as when he had first approached her at Seraphine's wedding. "Not tonight, my dear, nor any night hereafter, will you stand in shadow or diminish your light for others' comfort." The remainder of the afternoon passed in a pleasant haze of congratulations and conversation. As evening approached, guests began to take their leave, each departure bringing Marianne and Richard closer to the private communion they both anticipated. When at last they were alone, he led her not toward the grand master suite that tradition dictated they should occupy, but to a smaller, more intimate chamber in the east wing, overlooking the newly redesigned gardens where wildflowers now grew in artful profusion among more formal plantings. "Our chamber," he explained as he opened the door. "I had it prepared according to what I believed would please you, neither too grand nor too austere, with space for your books and painting supplies, as well as a view that might inspire your art." The room was indeed perfect, warm without ostentation, elegant without intimidation. A fire burned in the grate despite the summer evening, its light casting a golden glow over furnishings chosen for comfort as well as beauty. "It's lovely," she said, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "Exactly what I would have chosen for ourselves. There is one more thing," he added, leading her toward the window where a velvet-draped object stood on an easel. With careful hands, he removed the covering to reveal a watercolor painting, a landscape of extraordinary sensitivity, depicting a lone figure standing in a sunlit garden, face turned toward the light. "Your work," she breathed, recognizing the delicate brush strokes and luminous quality that characterized his grandmother's artistic style. "But how? Found in the attic among her personal effects," he explained. "The resemblance is merely coincidental, of course. Yet when I discovered it, I could not help but see you standing in the light you have always deserved." Marianne studied the painting, struck by the figure's posture, not dejected or diminished but quietly expectant, as though awaiting a long-promised dawn. "A fitting emblem for our beginning," she said softly, "from shadow into light, not through any external transformation, but through the simple power of being truly seen." Richard drew her into his arms then, his embrace both sanctuary and promise. "And so we begin, my love, not as Duke and Duchess, titles that matter little within these private walls, but as Richard and Marianne, two souls who have found in each other that rarest of blessings, complete recognition." As the last golden light of their wedding day faded into dusk, Marianne Vale Thornfield stood fully in the radiance of love's transformative power, no longer the invisible sister, the overlooked daughter, the shadow at life's feast, but a woman wholly herself, wholly loved, and finally irrevocably seen. In the years that followed, Thornfield Court would become known not merely as the seat of a dukedom, but as a place where authenticity was valued above artifice, where art and literature flourished, and where those who had known invisibility in their own lives might find recognition and respect. The Duke and Duchess, whose unusual love story had scandalized and captivated society in equal measure, would establish a foundation for young women of artistic promise but limited means, ensuring that talent need never again languish in obscurity for want of opportunity or encouragement. And if visitors to Thornfield Court sometimes remarked upon the curious sight of the Duchess and her sister, once famous for their strained relations, laughing together like carefree girls as they wandered through gardens where formal structure and wild beauty coexisted in harmonious balance, the Duke would merely smile, content in the knowledge that healing, like love, required only the courage to be seen and the wisdom to truly see. In a world that prizes spectacle over substance, the quiet soul often stands unseen. Yet true vision, the kind that pierces through society's superficial glare, recognizes authentic beauty in its most unassuming forms. Our story reminds us that being overlooked is not the same as being invisible. It is merely awaiting the gaze discerning enough to recognize our light. The deepest transformations occur not when we change to please others, but when we encounter those rare souls who cherish us exactly as we are. Marianne's journey from shadow to radiance required no alteration of her essential self, only the profound realization that she had always been worthy of love, of recognition, of standing in the full light of her own truth. Perhaps the most powerful message lies in understanding that our worth never depends on others' acknowledgement. Like the serious flower that blooms in darkness, our value exists independent of witness. Yet how the heart flourishes when finally seen. "Not tonight, my dear, shall you hide your tears, nor any night thereafter shall you diminish your brilliance for the comfort of those too accustomed to shadows. Remember, in your own moments of invisibility, that somewhere a gaze awaits that will recognize the extraordinary within your ordinary, the masterpiece within your mundane. And should you be fortunate enough to possess such vision yourself, use it generously, for there is no greater gift than to tell another soul, through word or deed, 'I see you, you matter, your light is needed in this world.'" Did you feel the flutter of recognition as Marianne stepped from shadows into light? Perhaps you too have known what it means to stand unseen, or you've been blessed with someone who truly sees you. Either way, this story belongs as much to you as to our characters. Subscribe now to journey with us through more tales of hearts transformed, souls redeemed, and love that arrives precisely when needed, never too early, never too late, but in that perfect moment when we're ready to be truly seen. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever experienced that moment of recognition, when someone's gaze seemed to acknowledge your deepest self? Or perhaps you've been the one to see beyond someone else's carefully constructed facade to the authentic soul beneath. Your stories matter, your perspective enriches us all. Join our community of readers who understand that the most powerful romances aren't merely about passion or status, they're about the quiet revolution of being truly, completely, and irrevocably seen. Until next time, may you both see and be seen, exactly as you are.